Welcome to the AMAI. Sorry.
AMAI.
AMAI.
Absolutely. Where we talk about some of the latest things coming up in AI and other random musings that we find interesting. And one of the first things to talk about is the announcement, I thought, about the OpenAI GPT Store launch date, which I heard about last week. They said that they would open it this week, and that is the week of January 8th when we are recording this. And so, in theory, it is supposed to launch sometime this week, and now we're going to actually have an actual kind of app store for GPTs.
All right, I'm looking it up.
What does this mean?
I was going to say, I'm looking it up right now to see if it says anything more than it exists.
Or that it's coming. They don't even, yeah. We got an email. Essentially, how the announcement came is the email came to all other GPT creators who've already created GPTs on the platform. They sent an email out to everybody last week, and they said that the GPT store will be opening next week. And that next week is now this week. So here we are. There's no mention of a specific day. Smart on their part. If you can avoid mentioning specific days for launching things, buy yourself some sanity. And so we'll have to see now when this launches and what it looks like and how it works.
You know, so it's really funny. As you know, I participate in a community called SaaSRock, and it's a product for building your own SaaS. And one of the questions, one of the members in the community asked me a question this weekend saying, how do you price this shit? How do you price AI? Like, do you just take a guess? And they're like, yeah, I mean, I think everyone just takes a guess and then they hope that they do it correctly. And if the AI is if they're using AI services cost more, you just increase the price until you get it right. And I'm like, or hear me out. You take the price into account and you have a baseline that includes a certain volume threshold, and then you increase and you meter it. And there's a reason why AWS, Google, Microsoft, and everything else is metered services. And by the way, when I say metered services, it's just like your electricity or your water. You have a base fee, and then you typically have a fee that's associated with usage, because it's impossible to just say, hey, I'm going to give you unlimited electricity. I'm going to give you unlimited water. Well, it's the same thing with AI services. Right. If Justin or I are using an AI service, it's very likely that we're going to cost the AI company money. However, if my wife was using it, she might use it twice a month and they'd make a lot of money on her, which sounds great in theory. But when it's early on and you don't know what your users' usage patterns are, you can really, really go upside down fast. And so if you're not a VC funded company that's willing to just absorb that hit, my recommendation is always to do some sort of a metered approach. Now, in this case, it doesn't mean you have to charge for every single query. It could be, hey, there are 10,000 included at this price. Anything over that, you jump to the next tier or whatever, but you just have to make sure that your costs are covered. And so I'm really curious to see how OpenAI does it, right? In the GPT store. Are they basically, when you charge money for one of these things, are they going to go the Apple route and take 30%? Or are they going to go and take 70%, right? It's going to be, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they charge. And is it a subscription or is it a per usage? Oh, I'm so excited to see how this works.
Yeah, it's so different than the Apple App Store, right? Because with the App Store, in the App Store, it's really simple, right? The maker of the app sets the price, either the download price for the as well as any kind of in-app purchases. There's a commission, 30%, widely known, that Apple takes on every purchase, right? And that's a nice, tidy way to do it. The difference between the Apple App Store and the GPT Store is that when you put something on the app, when you put something in the App Store, Apple, the organization that hosts and manages the store, is not also footing the bill for your resource usage, right? The resource usage comes elsewhere. You, the creator, manage the spend on the resource usage. And so you charge your price to, you do your typical unit economics when it comes to kind of SaaS or whatever it is. In this case, the dynamic is quite different because the entity hosting the store is also the entity providing access to the resources and also like funneling everything through a central repository of resources.
Not to mention the whole IP, right? Like, yes, you're creating the GPT, but like ultimately the IP is all built upon there. So they could easily charge 50%, and it would be hard for people to say that like their 50% is not worth Apple's 30%.
Right. But to your point about the metered usage, and why I think you're probably right on that, is that you can't just sort of charge a bigger commission. The reason is because you would have to have a pricing floor. You can't say you can put your GPT up for $1 a month and we'll make 50 cents a month, because then you have users that are bombing the thing out, costing $10 a month per account, right? And you're way upside down. And so then you end up having to either have minimum floors of pricing, which also doesn't make sense because it's completely arbitrary, or the only other way to do it is some type of metered billing. So I think you're right. I think some kind of metered billing has to be part of this pricing structure, because it's the only way that OpenAI can make sure that they don't run this thing into the ground in terms of getting it upside down on costs.
Well, let me go and say that OpenAI has already shown that they are willing to go both routes. And this is a very real potential. It may be that you can just subscribe to something if you're already a subscriber to ChatGPT Pro, right? And you just subscribe to it and you can use it manually at no metered usage. And it may be the API based approach hitting it is metered. And that's how they currently run. It's $20 a month and you can use it as much as you want manually. But if you're a computer and you want to hit it, then it's metered. And I actually think that they might go that route where they have a forked pricing model that matches their original pricing model. Because ultimately computers are what they're
machine
really
to
scary.
machine.
Machine to machine are scary because you can hit it 1,000 times a second. Right. Where human to human, like the human's going to hit it. Even if they have 5 computers, they're going to be like, pop, pop. Like they're just not going to. It's the computer that's really the scary thing. So they may go down that same path of you can subscribe to a pro GPT as a human, or you can pay metered usage as a machine. And by the way, you can tell we're just completely guessing. We have no inside information here. Sorry.
My connection got a little bit wonky there. I don't know if it's me or you. I think it's my machine, maybe, like, even though I have 64 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, no, it was definitely me.
It
said internet unstable.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this rolls out. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting about the GPT store that we have to think about also is that some of the early data, and I have to go back and see if I can find this early report. There was a report that came out like sometime late last year, November, December, about the early usage of the GPT store kind of in beta, if you will, or not GPT store, but of GPTs, right? And what they found is that actually not a lot of people are using them. Right. There was kind of this uptick, and then like not a bunch of people are now building custom GPTs, and they're back to using ChatGPT like they always did. Right. Question is the store going to change that, or are GPTs the wrong model?
That's interesting, right? And I think so. This is an interesting thing. One of the issues with ChatGPT is still the semi-unknown of essentially a startup and the data and AI and everything that means with that. And if the movers and shakers and the individuals don't care as much, one of the interesting things about the GPTs is the ease with which you can train it with your data, which is just not possible on the normal GPT.
Yep.
So I think you may find that it's an exploratory playground. and more so than, and people will wait to implement their own models, um, and or take a look at like Microsoft or somebody with a higher level of security implementing it before they really go hog wild.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of this is like the business use case for something like GPTs is way stronger than the human use case, I
The
think,
consumer. Yeah.
because you can train it to do someone's a specific task, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm making this up, but like somebody who was essentially an order entry where they look at something and they do it, and then you can train it on OCR, you can train it on the form itself, you could train it what every form field means, and then you could essentially replace a person relatively quickly, cheaply, and effectively, right? Now, yes, there's 1,000 ways you can do that already, but this is like a random business person could train the GPT to process a particular form for your company in 30 minutes, right?
Mhm.
Like it's stupid easy. Yes, it could be done 1,000 other ways, but this is a stupid easy approach.
Yeah.
Which is, so I think you'll find a lot of small businesses maybe taking advantage of that. Um, but I think what's really interesting is you heard about the New York Times suing them, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so that's another example of how's this going to work, right? If the training data ends up being an issue, um, you're going to be in a situation where like ChatGPT's whole business model dies. Um,
Um, yeah, I mean, if the copyright claim by the Times holds up in court, and I think this is going to be really interesting. I don't know what the next step of that is going to be. I don't know if they are taking that. I don't know where that lawsuit is at. I don't know what the status of this. My guess is some top brass from Microsoft is having a conversation with somebody at New York Times right now, and there's going to be some kind of settlement that happens and some kind of new partnership that gets announced that comes out of it that is going to make all of this go away.
well, so, but you say that, I don't think it can. And here's why. Because it's
Okay.
not just the New York Times, it's the Post, it's the St. Pete Times.
So you're saying it's like it's whack-a-mole. Once you satisfy one, they're all going to come after you for the same settlement and deal.
Yeah, correct. And so I don't think you can
Yeah.
settle. If I was Microsoft or ChatGPT, I wouldn't settle. I'd be guns blazing because they copied the internet, right? Like if you think about it, they copied the internet.
Yeah.
So it's not one company, it's every company.
Yeah.
But it gets down to the heart of what is, generative AI, and is it really unique? And we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before. Christmas break was really weird. Maybe 3 weeks ago. I don't know. It all runs together. But we talked about the idea that like, what was it? OpenAI, not OpenAI, but DeepMind solving
Yeah.
an unknown math proof.
Right.
That is clearly okay. So it was trained on other people's math formulas. But, like it had a unique, new, previously unknown answer.
Yep.
That is clearly the way humans think and learn too, right? Um,
Right. It's not just a parrot. It's not just regurgitating, right? So the question is if you can get it, if you can get OpenAI to spit out its resources and to say like essentially what the Times said, which is like you can get it to basically, reprint their articles, if you will, right? Nearly verbatim. Is that copyright infringement? Or is that the same as asking an intern who you asked to do research to say, hey, what article did you get that from? And they go, oh, it was this one. And I read it so well and know it so well, I can recite it for you. But I'm not claiming that I published it. And I'm not claiming that I wrote it. I'm just saying that I can pull that information back up for you. That's right on the line of, is this actually infringement or is it not?
oof, this is this is. I mean, society hangs in the balance, right?
Yes. For
Technology hangs in the balance of this particular conversation. And I think, this gets back to the heart of what we're talking about, the GPTs. It is ultimately about security and privacy and those kinds of things as well. And who owns the data? And I think that's one of the big, Chat GPT, it's not as clear. to the average person that their data is going to be safe. And so I don't think you're going to see people load up their whole database into ChatGPT for a custom private GPT for their company because they're going to be afraid that that's going to be used.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
so. I think it's a stepping stone, right? I think
Yeah.
it's a stepping stone.
It's interesting too. Like we've talked about this before. We'll talk about this again because I believe that in 2024, this is probably going to end up being one of the industries and one of the areas of the technology sector that grows a ton because of this. Is I maintain that with something like the GPT store and more easy turnkey AI solutions becoming available, that the market opportunity and where the market is going to respond is in the data collection, ETL pipeline, security and privacy, and essentially everything around handling and shuttling data from disparate sources into your own AI so that you can produce better quality work for your organization. That pipeline, and that involves collection, security, transformation, the whole thing around data is where if I were building another SaaS company today and I was looking for an opportunity in the market, that's where I would go build.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, and here's why.
Okay.
Because you're right. I wouldn't, and here's why. Because it's gonna be so easy. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, all they need to do is take their core databases and their core data offerings and plug in a private for your database AI solution that automatically works.
Here's the part of the problem that that doesn't solve: the messiness of fragmented data. That's where I think.
But it does, because you can just have a part of it as the queue on the data in.
You could, except let me give you a practical example. I want to build an AI that takes all of my Slack conversations, all of my Discord conversations, all of my emails
Yep.
into a single vector database so that now that thing can talk and converse like me, because that's the best cross section of my communication, right?
Perfect. Okay.
That is three different integrations with three different vendors,
with
three different completely separate data stores, right? Which have to be corralled. They have to be automated into some kind of queue and pipeline that pulls that all together in a standardized way, transforms it, sanitizes it, and secures all that data end to end as it goes, right? Where does it get stored at rest? In the vector database, presumably, securely, hopefully. So those type of last mile data collection solutions are right now all home built. If I want to build that right now, I've got to go build a Slack bot, a Discord bot, and an app that sits on top of Gmail, maybe using an AI or some API, if there is a Gmail API. I think there's.
Well, I mean, I don't think Google would have a problem pulling any Gmail info. I don't think
No.
Microsoft wouldn't have a problem pulling an Outlook info.
No, that would be very easy. It's when you connect it with other
again
non-FANG sources.
Fine, but like Microsoft Teams is bigger than Slack.
Correct. Install base, is it bigger in daily usage? Maybe. I don't actually know. Install base is definitely bigger.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the number one. Which, by the way, it just cracks me up. But it's corporate America. Thank you, corporate America, right?
Well, I mean it's included number one by default, not by choice.
It's included for free as part of Microsoft Office. Right. So and by the way, Microsoft's already doing this with AI, right? They've embedded AI and Copilot into Teams and into Outlook and into everything else. I don't see how Outlook and Microsoft don't win this race. Teams, Outlook.
Interesting thought, right? Because they have this competitive leverage because they can say, by the way, you want all your email and your Teams messages in one place, or all of this communication in one place and automatically in the AI? Just switch over to Teams and Outlook.
It's already there.
By the way, right. I mean, but they have an easy sale to get people to go, oh, I'll ditch Slack and I'll start using Teams so that I can get to the point where all of this data is co-located. And if the data is co-located, it can be used to train AI better.
Which Yeah, and so I don't know. I mean, I know neither of us are like I'm tech agnostic, right? So I had a Windows phone at one point, and I've had PCs. I've been an Apple guy for a long time, but I've had Androids, whatever.
Yep.
Generally, Apple builds better stuff, right? And so generally, Microsoft isn't known for building the most fun to use software. Having said that, they build very productive software. I still
Yep.
prefer Microsoft Office to Google suite of tools. There's just a
Mhm.
massive difference in quality. Um, and AI, like, hey, we played with it with PowerPoint, right? Like, it just generates really good stuff really quickly, automatically. It's crazy. But they've been working on this idea of shareable data. Have you seen this across all your apps?
I don't think I've seen that.
Um, and what it is like you can embed a chunk from one app into another app. And so you can have live editing in Outlook. It can go into Teams. It can go into their Notion competitor, whatever that's called. And that same that same chunk can be seen in 4 different apps and can be edited by 4 different people on 4 different apps on the same time. Um,
Uh, wow, I've not seen that. No, that's really interesting though.
and so it's like I just wish their UX was a little better because they
I
have
mean,
these ideas and they have like the horsepower and they make it work. It just isn't fun.
it's not fun. Not fun.
Yeah,
Corporate
I'm gonna
America's
find it in
not
a second.
fun. Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, you bring up a great point, right? Because like data interchangeability, this is an interesting thing about Apple too. This is something that I think is probably a real thorn in Apple's side, and is going to be something that is it's going to be interesting to see how they respond, because Apple, as we all know, and I am now I'm like you. I mean, I've had PCs, I've had Android phones, I've had Apple phones, I've gone back and forth, I've got an iPhone back to Android, back to iPhone, etc. over the years. I am right now deeply immersed in the Apple camp, and I've like just bought all the way in, and I don't know right now if I will ever buy another non-Apple machine or phone. Um, but one thing that we know about Apple to be true is that Apple's all about the closed ecosystem. They are not about outside of Apple. They are about building a closed, tight ecosystem between your data and your devices, but all inside of the Apple world. Does AI necessarily mean that we as a society have to think of data as more democratic and more open to be effective? And what does that do? How does that push on the philosophy of somebody like Apple who wants to cordon off data, but cordoning off data in this point is just going to make the result of the AI worse. So you can't be as competitive.
Which so fantastic. I love that. And Apple a long time ago said, "Hey, our AI would be better than Siri if we bothered to share everything with everybody, but we're private by default." And so Siri is worse than
Far
all of the
worse.
other AIs, and it's because their privacy by default is interesting. By the way, I'm just have to share my screen for a second so we can talk. I can show you this Microsoft stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so Microsoft Loop is their version of Notion. And again, I think it's included in Office 365, which just
Okay.
makes
Yep.
life very, very easy. Well, as part of that, when you look at this, you can see this is Teams, this is Loop, and this is Outlook. And there's an embedded task tracker, and you can see someone editing it and seeing it, multiple people, in all three at the same time.
Hmm.
Um,
You know what's interesting about this? So you see this interface. I actually think this is awesome to see, because this is exactly what I thought was going to happen. People have been asking me, we have been having discussions about this because I design a lot of software, and we've been talking about like chat interfaces. Is a chat based interface the way that this is all going to go, right? Everybody's thinking in terms of chatbots. And what they're showing here in this with this task tracker that is embedded is they're showing a multimodal chat experience, which is that you have chats with these embedded interactive experiences in them that are maybe displaying data, or you can respond to data, et cetera. And it's all mixed into this interactive chat-like experience, but not strictly just chat message threads. This is exactly the model of how I think future interaction on computers is going to end up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, generally, yes, they really ripped off a Notion.
Oh
And
yeah, they did.
but but they added a level of sophistication in AI that Notion just doesn't do yet.
Yeah.
But it is, their Copilot is fully embedded inside of most of Microsoft stuff now, right? But the way this works with Loop is that data can be pushed throughout all of your different apps and embedded
Mhm.
in all of your different places and then shared in all your different things. And ultimately, this is a data play. And that's why I think like
Yeah.
this is so smart. The way Microsoft's doing this is if they pull this off right and it becomes easy to use across all the different apps, it doesn't matter. Like, ironically, I always say like you should not use email internally. You should use your chat system. Extra email is for external communications, not internal communications.
Yeah.
Generally, Mm, I don't want to get into
Generally, yeah, I would
generally.
agree with that. I would agree with that. Yep.
Well, what something like this does is potentially flip that on its head and says, use the tool you care about. Like if you're in the task tracker all day, use the task tracker. If you're in
Right.
right, like so use the tool you care about and the context will move with you. And
Mm.
I thought I hadn't known if you've seen this. There's hundreds of demonstrations. I just pulled the one from the website.
It's interesting. So here's what is really interesting to me about this, and we should tease this conversation. We should like actually have this longer conversation later because I think this is fascinating. Because from a product design standpoint, kind of a design theory standpoint, right? If you think about using different apps, right? We use different apps on our machine for really two different reasons, two primary reasons, some other reasons. But the one is because we need a container for different ways to act on a piece of data. This container lets you do these things to this chunk of data. This other container lets you do these things to this chunk of data, right? Well, what we've already seen with AI is that it pulls all of it together. It says, just put the data in here and you can do everything to the data in one place, right? The next piece that's missing there is we use different apps even if all of them can do the same thing, because the data structure has to be structured in a certain way that we can interface and interact with it, right? It's interesting to think about the move toward this unified data architecture in the world where everything follows the same architecture and all data is now interchangeable across all apps everywhere because of
um,
the common data interchange format. Now, that's a very hard problem to solve because data structures are very different depending on domain and purpose and that kind of thing. But if there's a consolidation of tasks to this AI-based interaction where individual standalone apps, and I believe this is absolutely going to be the case as we go further into the future, individual standalone apps go away or start to become less important in comparison to one place that does it all. What
um,
does that mean for how we have to think about data and that ecosystem?
well, so I yeah, so we are just all over the place today, and that's one of the great things about just randomly talking. So have you heard about the block protocol? Um,
I don't know that. I mean, outside of the blockchain,
No, not the blockchain. So the block protocol is basically this concept that if you want data portability, you have to have block portability. And so these blocks, the ideas of these blocks are a checklist contains this info, a Kanban board contains this info, etc. And so you can take these blocks and any of the websites that follow the block protocol, they become interoperable and you can take the data from one place and move it to another instantly, because they have the idea of a standard format.
this is really interesting.
And so WordPress, I think, was one of the first ones, in GitHub, and to start GitHub blocks, Figma, so there's a couple that are in progress, but this essentially was being talked about when I think WordPress was first starting to look at the building with a block-based editor, and it became external people, not WordPress people, who basically said like it would be really helpful if we had more data portability. And so they came together and they created this idea of this consortium that will take and create, and you can see across the spectrum there are a lot of potential blocks that have the same standard data format. And so you can design anything you want, but if the data format's the same, it doesn't matter if you're using their block design or somebody else's or your own block design. The data format will transfer from one program to another program. And so, yeah.
Yep. That is really fascinating. And it is, what's interesting about it is it reflects a kind of a reality of how web development has changed and how building apps has changed over the years, which is everything has moved more component based, where apps are now composed. They're not written from scratch, right? Like ground up everything. You usually are building individual components and composing them together into a larger whole, right? That's how a lot of modern web development is done. Thank you, React, for driving a lot of that. This is the same kind of strategic expression of that, if you will.
And so they come with a block schema, which will tell you how to do it. And they also come with block properties. And so anyway, it's a very good pattern. I'm a big believer in componentized approach. I have been for a long time, long before React existed, because I'm old. I'm really old, apparently, right? And I think that it's about time that somebody went through and did something like this and standardized the approach. Inside organizations, they've been doing it forever, but they've never tried to create a public one, really.
What I'm curious about with block protocol or other things like this, and we'd have to look at the website and investigate and see, but at some point there's going to have to be probably a standard and a standards committee that starts to develop a spec around this, right? There is, for example, this has been done in other places on the web. Obviously, fundamental components of the web early on, the W3C created the initial kind of spec and everything for that. There's also like things like activity streams. So if you have an activity stream on a website where you say you have like a feed, right? A Facebook feed where it's like people are posting and commenting and that kind of thing. There's an official spec for that activity stream. It's like activity streams, but like the last two, it's like .es or something like that. But there is an official spec for how you structure the data in an interchangeable way if you're building feeds. And it's smart to follow that because it means that all the tooling that you can build on top of that kind of just naturally lays on top of it. I think the same thing's going to have to happen here, where there is a data interchange format that we all agree on that allows this to happen, but in that block-based kind of way. It's really interesting. It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah. And so if you really look at this episode to try to wrap it up, we started talking about ChatGPT. We started talking about the new GPT store, which led us to data privacy, which led us to talking about the incumbents and their natural advantage, which led us to Microsoft, which and their inherent advantages from my perspective, especially being part of the corporate ecosystem, and then led us to loop and data portability, and then that led us to the block protocol and further data portability, which this is all ultimately it's all about data. It's
all about data.
It's
2024 is the year of data and how to get more of it into the big head that is AI.
And yeah, and use it. So I hope everyone enjoys their day. All 5 of you who might watch this. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Back with more AMAI tomorrow.